All right, we're looking at a 1999 Toyota 4Runner, limited four-wheel drive, and it needs a rear axle seal. And I don't have the wheel off yet, but I checked it out last week, and it's leaking axle fluid into the brakes. And nobody had the part around here last week in St. Louis, so I had to order it. So I'm bringing it back. So that's how I know it's the axle seal without taking the wheel off yet. Anyway, it's pretty straightforward on these. So we'll get to work on. We'll get the wheel off and the drum off here, and then we'll go ahead and I'll show you how to take the axle out and change that seal inside there. And then if this happens to your car, you're definitely going to want to change the brakes, because once they get soaked down with that axle fluid or axle grease, they're going to be no good. So we got new brakes for it too in the rear, even though it already has new brakes in the rear. Probably less than a year old. Once they get soaked down with that, it's best just to go ahead and replace them. The brakes aren't terribly expensive on these, so I think they're about $35 or so. So it's worth just going ahead and changing it instead of trying to clean those old pads up. So anyway, get the wheel off, the drum off, and we'll take a look at it. Alright, so I got the drum off. I don't know if you can tell, it's just soaked with axle fluid down here. This is all wet. It's all wet around the brake pads. It's all wet around the backing plate. And inside the drum here, it's wet. So we're going to go ahead and clean the drum out. You won't have to replace that if it's still a good drum. We'll spray that down with some brake cleaner and let it soak. On these brakes, it's already got new wheel cylinder and all new hardware. So someone had just changed these recently, but I guess the seal broke or started leaking after they had changed these, which is unfortunate, but it is what it is. So we'll go ahead and fix it. So the first thing we'll do is disconnect this emergency brake pawl right here, and then what I like to do is take this spring and bend it up around here and just kind of take this all off as one unit and set it off to the side. And then we'll go about removing the axle and all that good stuff. You have to remove this whole backing plate here. So you will have to break loose your brake line back here. And what I do is take a blocker and block the rubber hose so that we don't lose all the fluid out of the master cylinder. And then, so that's getting a little ahead of myself. So let's get this parking brake off first and get these brakes off, and then we'll go over the rest of it. Alright, so on this parking brake, normally what I do is just kind of pull on this pawl over here on this side, and that'll be enough spring in it to disconnect it from here. And this goes out to the back behind the behind the backing plate here. And then you have the parking brake assembly spring all that back here. There's a cable going to it. You got to release that because we're going to pull this whole thing off. So all that is this clip here. You just kind of spread it. It's like a cotter pin, but not really. You just kind of spread it and pull it off of this pin, and then you just slide this pin out, and then you're able to pull that cable back here, right here, completely off of the backing plate, which is all you're trying to do. You're just trying to get this backing plate loose from the vehicle so that we can get the axle out. So next thing I'll probably do is I'm going to go ahead and take these brakes off, I guess. So on the bottom here, take a big screwdriver and pull that spring up and under and over this bracket here, and that'll kind of bring everything in a little bit. And you're able, if you pull this, and then take, if you have one of the tools for the spring, put that on there and take these two off. And then this thing almost should pull out as a unit. So I'll go ahead and do that, and we'll see how it goes with it. Sometimes they fall apart, but anyway, that's what I'll do. So I don't know if the screwdriver's big enough. Got the door closed today because it's 20 degrees here in St. Louis in the fall. Lighting is going to be a little bit maybe not as good as usual, hopefully. Once you get the spring kind of out from under the bracket here. These two will, there's so much grease on this one, axle grease, it's slipping off. Alright, so I'm going to grab my tool for those springs. You can use needle nose or whatever you have. If you don't have one of these tools, it makes it a little bit easier. It just goes right over the clip here. You just hold the back of it, push in and turn it, and that releases the spring. You see that? If you're doing this job, hopefully you have some experience doing rear brakes. A lot of guys hate doing these type of drum brakes. It's pretty much all that was available when I started working on cars in the rear, so I don't really get too bent out of shape about having to do them. I prefer doing I definitely prefer doing disc brakes. So anyway, it's so greasy I can barely hold it with my hands. So I'm going to spray this down a little bit and try to dry it off some rags, and then I'm going to go ahead and pull this all off, and then we'll get to this backing plate and start working on that. Alright, so you can see there I got the brakes off. Like I said, I pulled it off all as one unit. It's just kind of hard to deal with because they're so greasy from the axle grease. So the next thing I'm going to do is disconnect the brake line from the wheel cylinder, and like I said, I'm going to get a brake line blocker and block off the rubber hose so that we don't lose all the fluid out of the master cylinder. That would be a good thing for you to do because you don't want to have to start over with bleeding everything. If you block it off and just lose the fluid out of this wheel, more than likely you only have to bleed this wheel. I'll go ahead and bleed them all anyway, do a little power bleeding on them, but you know, it makes it much easier if you start off with a decent pedal to begin with, or a decent amount, not a lot of air in the system, I should say. I don't bleed with the pedal. I usually bleed with my power bleeder, but anyway, get off the subject. So I'll loosen this, block that off, and then we'll start pulling this axle out of here. Alright, we're out of the truck right now. This is that rubber hose that goes from the front, well, the steel line goes to the back here, and then it goes to our rubber hose. And then this rubber hose goes to a block, and then it goes off to the two steel lines for the rear brakes. Go ahead and clamp this off if you can. You can pick these up pretty cheap. These are some old OTC ones I've had for years, but you can pick these up pretty cheap. Some guys use vice grips. If you're going to do that, I would put some hose around the ends of it so that you don't damage this hose. It's better just to go get a couple of these. They're pretty cheap. So block this line, clamp down this line. That way when you got your wheel cylinder off, you're not losing all the fluid out of your master cylinder, and you're not having to start over bleeding the brakes completely. So anyway, got that off, so now we'll get that line off, the steel line from the wheel cylinder, and then we'll pull that backing plate and axle out. Alright, I got this camera kind of at a weird angle. Hopefully it shows up. So here's your 10mm brake line for the wheel cylinder. Go ahead and loosen that, get it out of the way. The other thing I forgot about was the ABS sensor. That's right here. That goes down into your axle right here, this hole. It's 10mm bolt, and this one was pretty rusty. I had to work it. You can see, well, I hope you can see a lot of rust on it, and it's got that little O-ring here, so we're going to try to find a new O-ring for it, and then clean this up really good. But be careful with it. You don't want to break it or break it off in the axle. You may not have to remove it. I do, just so it doesn't get damaged. I don't think it doesn't ride on the actual tone ring. So anyway, I went ahead and removed it. and just kind of worked it back and forth slowly. A lot of rust build up. And so now we're going to go after these bolts right here, these nuts. We're going to loosen all 4 of these, and then this axle should pull out, I believe. So I'm going to get to work on these, and then I'll pick back up with you after I get started on it. Alright, so we got the axle pulled out. You got the 4 nuts on the backing plate. They're 14 millimeter. You just break those loose, and then I use a Milwaukee electric ratchet, take them out, or whatever you can get in there. They're pretty tight. So go ahead, once you get those 4 out, go ahead and grab a hold of your backing plate and pull it out as straight as you can. Like I said, on this ABS sensor, I went ahead and took it out. You may not have to, because it doesn't actually, this is what it reads right here, your tone ring. It doesn't actually touch that, but it's very close to it, so I just took it out to avoid damage. Maybe some guys that do these every day can tell you something different, but I went ahead and replaced it, or took it out. So this is what you're after right here, this seal. This is what allows the axle grease to come past, and it gets past, you know, comes through there, and then it starts leaking all over your brakes. So we're going to go ahead and snap this one out of here. I'm going to try to use my slide hammer and this attachment I have to get it out. There's different ways you can do it. It's not like it's super hard to get that out. You could probably put, if you're careful, you could probably put a big pry bar in there and just kind of hit it sideways and pop it out. But I'm going to try to use my axle remover on my slide hammer to pop it out. There's also other attachments for your slide hammer for seals like this that grab a hold of it and pull it out. So anyway, I'm going to try to do that real quick and see if that works. And then we'll pop the new seal in there and then start putting this thing back together. Alright, so I got the seal out. The piece I had for my slide hammer was too big to go in there. I severely underestimated how small this hole is. So what I did is put a pair of channel locks in there and got it up against the seal and just hit the channel locks with a hammer a couple times, tapped it, and it popped right out. Like I said, there is attachments for slide hammers, but mine didn't fit and wasn't even close. So this is the seal. So once you get it popped out, we'll just kind of clean up in here, which it should be pretty clean anyway. Just go ahead and wipe it all out, and then we'll get the new one and we'll drive a new one in there, and then we can start putting this thing back together. Alright, so hopefully I don't screw this up because I only got one seal, and like I said, we had to order it. So this is the new seal here, and this is what I'm going to use to drive in. It's a seal driver. One side's for races, the other side's for seals. This fits pretty good up against there. It's not hitting the inner part of the seal. You don't want to drive onto the inner part. You want to get as far out from the outer edge as you can, but you can't go all the way out because then you won't be able to drive it all the way in. So this one's going to be the right size. And hopefully it goes in straight, because if it doesn't, I screw it up, then who knows. Like I said, I had to order this one. So, not that I screw those up all the time, but it does happen to the best of us. So I'm just going to kind of set it in there as straight as I can and get it started by hand to where I feel like it's pretty level in there. And then we'll try to drive it down as level as we can. Okay, so that's in there pretty straight. So now we're going to put that driver in there, and we'll try to drive it in as level as we can until we hear it bottom out. You should hear like a little bit of a different noise. And I guess going in pretty straight, maybe a little bit. It's pretty straight. Just, you know, a little bit off on the one corner. So if you get, like right now, it's a little bit popped up here, farther than it is down here. So kind of move your punch or your seal driver up a little bit and kind of concentrate on that corner. It's just a little bit. There we go. Now I actually felt it straighten out. So now it's looks like it's pretty level all the way around. Maybe a hair on this side, but it's in there about 80% of the way, so almost can't screw it up at this point, but I don't want to jinx myself. And you hear that different sound, more of a dull thump. That means it's bottomed out, so there's no point to keep beating on it. Just go in there and look at it, make sure everything is all even, and it is. So that's a good install there. So anyway, that's in, so we can start putting the axle back together. Now you do have a bearing and a toe ring and some other things on your axle. If you want to change that, you need a special tool to change the bearing, or take it to your machine shop. This one doesn't seem like feels tight. I don't feel any bearing issues, so I think we're okay on that one. So anyway, now that's back together, we'll go ahead and start guiding this axle back in there and start buttoning it back up. Alright, just so I don't gloss over anything, if you're new to this or haven't done one of these, this is what I use to drive that seal back in. This is a seal and bearing set. I've had this for a long time, but you can rent, I'm pretty sure you can rent those at auto parts stores. If you don't have that, which is definitely preferred, you might be able to find a socket or a pipe or something like that to use to drive it in there. I don't like doing that. I mean, a socket might be okay if you can find one big enough, but you really want to be, these seals you can distort them pretty fast, and then you're going back to the auto parts store looking for another one. So just be careful with it. You don't beat on it too hard. Make sure it's straight when you start it. And this is definitely the preferred method of installing them, is get one of these race and bearing or race and seal kits if you have the ability to do that. So anyway, I just wanted to cover that because you know, I don't know, just for new people or someone that's not familiar with it. So anyway, I got this all cleaned up real good, and I'm going to go ahead and slide this back in there. When you slide it back in, make sure you hold your axle steady. You don't want to nick the seal going back in, because if you do, then you'll be back to square one. You'll be leaking again, and then your brakes will get screwed up again, and you'll be starting all over. So just guide the axle in straight as you can, and try to keep it off of your new seal here. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then we'll start those 14 millimeter nuts and get this thing buttoned back up. Alright, once you got the axle guide in there, you're going to have to guide it. You may have to turn your axle slightly to get it to lock back in. It should slide in pretty easy though, don't force it. If it's not going in right, then just kind of lift up on it and try to keep it centered when you're going in there. If you start dragging the axle across the axle tube, you know, the bearings, all that stuff, it'll get caught up on stuff. So just kind of lift up on this and guide it in as straight as you can. So that's pretty much it on changing the axle seal. I'm not going to show putting the brakes back together and all that good stuff. Like I said, I got new brakes for it. I'm not going to reuse the greasy brakes. I highly recommend, if you have an issue like this, to go ahead and change your brakes, even if they're brand new, because you'll never get all that axle grease off the brakes. So, and then, like I said, I don't want to turn this into a brake video, but go ahead and grease your points right here where the brake shoes ride it back and forth. Put your brake line back on and your ABS and all that good stuff. And then don't forget to take off your block off on your hose. And then just go ahead and bleed your brakes. Technically, you probably don't need to bleed the front. You really could probably get away with just bleeding the backs, but I'm going to go ahead and do all four. But you know, like I said, I don't want to turn this into a brake video, so that's another video. So anyway, that's changing the axle seal on a Toyota 4Runner 4x4, the rear axle seal. I think that's about it. If you have any questions or comments, leave them down below. Please subscribe on Facebook or YouTube, wherever you're seeing this at, the opposite. Appreciate you watching. We'll see you on the next one, and God bless.